This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt Podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. Have you ever heard the saying, "What starts in chaos ends in chaos"? That fairly sums up the case today. All the people involved in this story were either related or were having affairs. This is just a friendly reminder to get an old-fashioned divorce before you move on to a new person. Happy Valentine's Day, y'all. You're listening to episode 74, Gary Knepp. Mottville is a tiny township on the border of Michigan and Indiana and is mostly considered a farming community. The 1,500 residents in Mottville were not prepared for the news they received on February 19, 1996. It was Monday, just after 8:30 p.m., and 28-year-old Gary Knepp drove off the road near St. Joe Street. Her Dodge Omni went through a fence gate before it crashed into the front porch of Jason Saylor's farmhouse at 70154 Michigan 103. The house was close to St. Joseph River Road, just south of Mottville in southwest St. Joseph County. The driver's window was shattered, and all the car's doors were locked. Carol was terribly injured, but the lack of damage to her vehicle did not align with the graveness of her condition. They took her to the emergency room via ambulance, and she was officially pronounced dead at 9:40 p.m. at Three Rivers Area Hospital. Carol was a month shy of her 29th birthday. They took her to Grand Rapids for an autopsy the following day. The medical examiner confirmed that Carol had been shot. A bullet entered her back and exited through her chest. The St. Joseph County Major Crimes Task Force didn't have immediate leads and thought that Carol may have been shot in proximity to the property where she crashed her car. Gary Knepp was born on March 16, 1967, in Sturgis, Michigan. She had grown up and spent most of her life in southern Michigan. Her parents owned a local business that she sometimes helped with. Carol had a Midwestern upbringing that many of us are familiar with, including enjoying the outdoors and riding all-terrain vehicles on the weekends. She graduated from White Pigeon High School in 1986. After high school, Carol took a job at a local factory, and that was where she met a man named Gary Knepp. Gary and Carol really clicked and had similar interests. However, Gary had been married to a woman named Lori Watts for about 4 years. Gary stepped out on his marriage and had an affair with Carol. His wife found out about the affair directly when she caught them being intimate. Gary divorced Lori in November 1994. The ink was barely dry on Gary's divorce, and he married Carol a few months later on Valentine's Day in 1995. By all accounts, Gary and Carol had a loving and warm relationship. They didn't have any children, but had several pets. They also enjoyed hanging out and socializing with close friends. Ron Hostetter had been a good friend of Gary's for several years. They met because they were both truck drivers. Ron's wife Lisa would often join them, and the foursome would hang out, since both couples lived in Mottville. Their social calendars were always full, and they enjoyed each other's company. Ron and Lisa had been together for a while. Gary and Carol were still in the new relationship energy phase. Gary and Carol Knepp celebrated their first wedding anniversary 5 days prior to her murder. 8 months after Carol had died, the prosecutor's office in St. Joseph County requested a medical examiner's inquest. This type of hearing was not common, but under Michigan law, a 6-person jury listens to testimony, and the goal is to determine how someone died and figure out who should be held responsible. An inquest trial has more latitude and broader rules than the typical criminal trial. There had only been 5 inquests in St. Joseph County's history. The hearing started on October 1st, 1996. Prosecutor Jeffrey Middleton said Carol had only been a quarter of a mile from her home at 68896 Walnut Road in Mottville when she was shot. She left her home around 8:25 p.m. on February 19, 1996. She was working the night shift, which started at 9 p.m., at Russell Products in Middlebury, Indiana. Gary told Carol that he was going to call her around 9:15 or 9:30 p.m. to ensure she arrived at work safely. Police were called to 70154 Michigan 103 at 8:36 p.m. because Carol had driven her car into a farmhouse. Law enforcement estimated that Carol maintained consciousness for about 1/10 of a mile prior to hitting the house. Initially, EMS had not realized that Carol suffered a gunshot wound. When an officer was driving to the farmhouse, he saw glass that had shattered across the road. They suspected that was where the shooting happened. The fragments that were removed from Carol's body during the autopsy revealed that she was hit with No. 6 shot fired from a 20-gauge shotgun at close range. On the night of the murder, law enforcement's first stop was the Knepps' home. The lights were off and the house appeared empty. Eventually, Gary Knepp emerged from around the side of the house. He was nervous and his voice cracked when he spoke. Officers asked him about his wife. He said he was worried about Carol because she received threats over the phone. As a result, she changed her phone number and her work hours. Gary said he was at their house the whole time, including when his wife left for work at 8:25 p.m. When he called Carol at work, she never answered. There were 1-minute calls placed from the Knepp house to Ron and Lisa Hostetter's home at 8:30 and 8:33 p.m. He placed a 1-minute call to Carol's work at 9:25 p.m., and a 10-minute call was placed again to the Hostetter's number at 9:29 p.m. The phone records confirmed Gary's alibi. Gary and Carol only had one working car, which Carol had taken that night. Gary wanted to borrow a car from Lisa Hostetter so he could look for his wife. Lisa came over with a vehicle when the police were at his house. Law enforcement took that opportunity to interview Lisa Hostetter. She quickly pointed out that Gary and Carol's relationship started as an affair. Lisa tried to paint Gary's ex-wife, Lori Watts, as a likely suspect. Gary also had a feeling that his ex-wife might have been behind the threatening phone calls. Lori Watts was questioned, and she had an alibi. She was with her boyfriend that night. During the police interview, Lori revealed she had an affair with Lisa's husband, Ron Hostetter. However, the affair was short-lived. Police visited Carol Knepp's mother, Virginia Yoder, to break the news of her daughter's death. Virginia told them a very important fact that reframed their investigation. Carol discovered a card that Lisa had given Gary, where she professed her love for him. Investigators realized that this was a much more complicated and layered case. There were many interpersonal issues that surfaced because of the web of infidelities. They immediately focused on Lisa Hostetter, but she quickly lawyered up. A few days after Carol's murder, investigators interviewed Ron Hostetter because they needed insight for the affair between his wife Lisa and Gary Knepp. Ron wasn't ready to be forthright with law enforcement and didn't give them any new information. Gary Knepp's mother, Rosalie, said Gary called her at 2:30 a.m. after Carol was killed. He said that they got her. Rosalie was confused and didn't understand what that meant. Gary told his mom that someone killed Carol. She knew her son was having an affair with Lisa Hostetter, and Lisa wanted to divorce her husband Ron to marry her son. Rosalie said that her son owned the fact that he had an affair with Lisa, but he really loved Carol. He didn't want to ruin his marriage because he had been married 3 times already. At the medical examiner's inquest, witnesses testified with stories that didn't look good for the Hostetters. One witness said Lisa contacted a man named Jerry Trump and convinced him to make threatening calls to the Knepp house. Jerry promised to teach Lisa and her sister how to shoot a gun, but that never materialized. Another witness said that Ron Hostetter used a camera paired with a telephoto lens and took pictures of Carol Knepp's car when it was parked at her home. Lisa Hostetter asked several people if there was anyone to help her get rid of Carol Knepp. Witnesses testified Ron threatened to kill himself with a 20-gauge shotgun and said he wrote a note confessing to the crime. Dale Smith was Lisa's brother-in-law. Dale's wife claimed Dale and Ron were working on a car in her garage on the night of the murder. Witnesses claimed that Dale Smith was trying to blackmail Lisa for money, and he supposedly had video evidence that the Hostetters killed Carol Knepp. Warren Dixon III took a 20-gauge shotgun to the Elkhart, Indiana police. He was reading the news and found out that a 20-gauge shotgun had been used in Carol Knepp's murder. When Ron Hostetter had been subpoenaed for the medical examiner's inquest, he gave the 20-gauge to Warren. Later, Ron asked Warren about the 20-gauge shotgun, and instead of telling Ron that he brought it to the police station, he lied and said he threw the gun in the river. Warren rightfully pointed out that if someone threw his property in the river, he would be upset, but Ron didn't seem bothered. We should note that Gary Knepp, Ron Hostetter, and Lisa Hostetter were all subpoenaed but didn't show up at the inquest. Dale Smith was Lisa's brother-in-law, and he was also summoned. Dale was an Indiana resident, so he did not honor the Michigan subpoena and didn't show up to the hearing. Gary Knepp's lawyer claimed that the prosecution withdrew his subpoena when the defense revealed they planned to challenge the legitimacy of the medical examiner's inquest. On October 8, 1996, the 6 jury members for the inquest deliberated about 2 hours and determined that Gary Knepp, Ron Hostetter, Lisa Hostetter, and Dale Smith were all potential defendants in Carol Knepp's murder. At the end of the inquest, the prosecution was tight-lipped about the timeline for potential arrests and said they needed to follow up on leads from the inquest. They were also testing the shotgun for ballistics and fingerprints. Around this time, Dale Smith held his wife Cheryl at gunpoint and threatened her. Cheryl Smith was Lisa Hostetter's sister. When Dale was arrested, he told investigators he wanted to discuss Carol Knepp's murder. Dale claimed that Ron and Lisa Hostetter planned the murder, but he didn't take part in it. It was 1 year after the murder, and no one had been arrested. Carol's mother, Virginia, remembered the night when police informed her that her daughter was killed in a drive-by shooting. She told the officer that Carol had been getting death threats in the prior weeks. Virginia hoped that they would solve the crime. The family often debated if Carol was part of a so-called love triangle, as uncovered in the inquest, or perhaps she inadvertently was killed by someone in a drug ring or got into trouble with a group of dangerous people. The whole situation was surreal to them. Someone had already vandalized Carol's grave twice. The family thought the killers might have been sending them a message. Do you need an easy way to eat well and save money? Cut back on expensive takeout and delivery and get started with HelloFresh. You'll love how fast, easy, and affordable it is to whip up a restaurant-quality meal right in your own kitchen. You can customize select meals by swapping proteins or sides and even adding protein to a veggie dish. And now you can even upgrade for organic chicken or organic ground beef. I'm not the best or most interesting cook. I appreciate HelloFresh because they always have some sauce or twist on a dish that I could never come up with myself. Go to HelloFresh.com/BeyondPod65 and use code BeyondPod65 for 65% off plus free shipping. One more time. That's HelloFresh.com/BeyondPod65 and use code BeyondPod65 for 65% off plus free shipping. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. In April 1998, Lisa Hostetter went to the police and told them Ron was responsible for Carol's death. Ron Hostetter and Lisa Dolph Hostetter were divorced. Ron was with a new woman named Carrie, and Lisa had moved in with Gary Knepp. FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office from Grand Rapids were added to the investigation. Prosecutor Jeffrey Middleton had requested the FBI's help. Evidence relating to Carol Knepp's murder spanned 2 states. She was murdered in Michigan, but they discovered the murder weapon in Indiana, which would establish a federal jurisdiction. Plus, the case's complications continued to compound years after Carol's murder. In March 1999, Robert Benton was Lisa Dolph Hostetter's brother-in-law and was married to Lisa's sister, Jean Ann. Robert was a sheriff's deputy and lived in Elkhart, Indiana. Gary Knepp was in the basement of Robert's home and wanted to see Benton's wife, Jean Ann. Robert and Gary walked upstairs to look for Jean Ann, but she wasn't home. Gary pulled out a stun gun and assaulted Robert. Then Gary pulled a real gun out and shot Robert in the stomach. Robert flew down the stairs and escaped out of the house. Gary Knepp had his day in court a year later, and his defense was that Robert Benton misidentified him as the shooter. A few people wrote the judge letters for the sentencing hearing, including Carol Knepp's cousin. They wanted the judge to know that Gary was trying to collect on a substantial insurance policy. They sentenced Gary Knepp to 45 years for the attempted murder of Robert Benton. Robert Benton and wife Jean Ann divorced. Jean Ann was charged with embezzlement, but had been found not guilty. She still faced other criminal charges. Gary's home was burnt to the ground shortly after Robert Benton's shooting. Investigators ruled the fire an arson, and arrests were never made. In September 1999, a pipe bomb damaged Ron and Carrie's house. No one was injured. No arrests were made, but Gary Knepp and Lisa Dolph Hostetter were considered suspects. Carrie also told police that Lisa had left them threatening messages. Ron Hostetter finally came forward and told investigators the truth about Carol Knepp's murder. Ron and Lisa's relationship was rocky in 1996 because she had an affair with Gary. But Ron and Lisa found their way back to each other, briefly. Lisa convinced him that Carol threatened her and the kids, because she was very upset about the affair. They also involved Lisa's brother-in-law, Dale Smith. Lisa was outside the Knepps' house on the night of February 19, 1996. When Carol left for work, Lisa radioed Ron and Dale, who were on the roadside waiting for Carol to drive by. Ron was the driver and Dale was the shooter. Gary Knepp was unaware of their plans to kill his wife. This information was enough for investigators to make arrests. In August 2000, they charged 39-year-old Ronald Hostetter with conspiracy to commit murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. They set his bond at $250,000. They charged 42-year-old Dale Smith with conspiracy to commit murder and being an accessory after the fact to murder. Bond was denied for Dale Smith. 40-year-old Lisa Dolph Hostetter was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. They arrested Lisa in Indiana, and she waived extradition since they denied her bond. Once she arrived in Michigan, her attorney argued for bond, stating she was a single mom with no previous record. Her bond was initially denied, but was later granted. 41-year-old Cheryl Dolph Smith was charged with perjury. During the inquest, she told the jury she did not know Carol or Gary Knepp and did not make threats against them. Cheryl also said that Dale and Gary were working on a car in their garage until 9 p.m. the night Carol was murdered. These were false statements per Ron's account of the crime. Cheryl paid the $15,000 bond in Indiana and turned herself over to Michigan law enforcement. In Michigan, Cheryl paid her $7,500 bond. When she was out of jail, she failed to keep herself out of trouble. Less than a year later, she purchased 21 handguns from 2 licensed Indiana firearms dealers. She lied about having pending felony charges. Gary Knepp was not charged. Even with all suspects in jail, Cheryl Dolph Smith and Ron's wife Carrie Hostetter both filed reports with police that their homes were broken into on August 30th, 2000. Cheryl said that a variety of electronic equipment, tools, a typewriter, and beer were missing. She said the items were valued at $1,163.99. Carrie reported a break-in on the same day. She found suspicious marks around a door that could have been made with a prying device. Police said that there was no evidence of entry into the Hostetter's home, and nothing was missing. The prosecution faced a major hurdle. Michigan had a special spousal privilege law on the books that meant Ron couldn't testify against Lisa because they were married at the time of the crime. This law basically protected the individual who was charged with the crime. In October 2000, Michigan changed their spousal privilege law, which allowed witnesses to decide if they wanted to testify against their spouse who was charged with a crime. The prosecutor pushed for this law to retroactively apply to Carol Knepp's case. The defense attorney said the new law should not apply to a crime that happened 4 years ago. After going through the court system, they decided that the defense could not block Ron from testifying against his ex-wife, Lisa Dolph. The prosecutor and Ron Hostetter struck a deal. In exchange for testifying against Lisa and Dale, they gave Ron a lesser charge of second-degree murder. In June 2001, Dale Smith was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and was sentenced to life in prison. The publicity of this case immediately after the murder was far-reaching. There was a venue change so Dale Smith could get a fair trial. But Lisa Dolph's trial didn't start until February 22, 2005. The judge felt that the public attention had died down over the past 4 years, and they could assemble an impartial jury in St. Joseph County. 100 jurors were summoned, and after 5 hours, the attorneys whittled the pool down to 14, 7 men and 7 women. This case had gone on for so long that a new prosecutor had taken over. In opening statements, the defense attorney said that Lisa's family was going to provide an alibi for the night of Carol Knepp's murder. And there were alternative suspects who wanted Carol dead. They believed police developed tunnel vision early in the investigation and overlooked other potential suspects. Law enforcement collected evidence that supported their theory instead of developing a theory based on all the evidence. The prosecution had a challenging time setting up the case for the jury. He emphasized it was complicated. There were several people involved, lots of affairs, and many folks were related. The prosecutor knew it would be an experience that the jury would never forget. Plain and simple, Lisa Dolph wanted Carol Knepp's husband for herself. Lisa manipulated her husband and brother-in-law by telling them that Carol threatened her and the kids. She was the mastermind behind the murder and was one of a handful of people who knew Carol's new work schedule. Per his plea agreement, Ron Hostetter testified against his wife. He explained to the jury how much Lisa disliked Carol Knepp. One time, Lisa dropped Ron off at Carol's home around 4:30 in the morning. She instructed him to hide behind their house and shoot Carol when she left for work. Ron just couldn't do what his wife wanted. Lisa picked Ron up, and they got into a huge fight because he didn't follow orders. She threw him out of the car, and as he walked along the road, Lisa hit him with the vehicle. Ron fell to the ground, but luckily he wasn't injured. He got back in the car, and they both drove home. Ron said that Lisa planned the attack. He drove the car, and Dale Smith fired the shot into Carol's car window. The defense tried to attack Ron's credibility. He had an affair with Lori Watts, who was Gary Knepp's ex-wife, and they should both be considered suspects. The defense pointed out that Gary Knepp could have also killed Carol. Lori Watts testified and admitted to her short-lived affair with Ron from summer to fall 1995. Prior to the murder, Lisa asked Lori if she had acquaintances who could eliminate her issue with Carol. Lisa Dolph's sister, Jean Ann, testified against her. Jean Ann claimed Lisa threatened 4 people and promised to kill her if she testified in this case. If Jean Ann testified, she was quote-unquote as good as Carol, meaning she would be dead. Lisa threatened Jean Ann after Gary shot her ex-husband, Robert Benton, in the stomach. Lisa was livid when Gary was arrested for the attempted murder. If Robert sent Gary to prison, she planned to take care of him, just like she did Carol, and she would have an airtight alibi as well. Jean Ann did her best to not look at her sister when she was on the stand. The defense attorney tried to discredit Jean Ann because she had legal issues, and he said her testimony was just a way to implicate her sister to get back at her. The defense tried to downplay the relationship between Lisa and Gary Knepp, since that relationship supported the prosecutor's motive for the crime. But Jean Ann told the court that Lisa was so distraught over the thought of losing Gary that she put a gun to her own head. Lisa was going to kill her children and then kill herself if Gary went to prison. She would rather be dead than be without him. The day after the murder, Lisa called Jean Ann and told her that a woman from Mottville was killed in a drive-by shooting, even though that information had not been reported to the masses. Lisa also said that Carol was a bad person and that the bitch deserved to die. Jerry Trump testified. Lisa claimed Carol threatened her family because of the love letter between her and Gary. After Carol was murdered, Lisa asked Jerry to destroy the love letter for her. Gary Knepp's mother, Rosalie, tried to testify at trial. She had several strokes over the years that affected her memory, and she couldn't recall testifying at the inquest in 1996. The judge allowed the prosecution to read a transcript of her testimony. She had dinner with Gary and Carol in 1996, and they told her Carol was moving to third shift at work. 2 days later, Lisa visited Rosalie and said she could not reach Gary by phone. Rosalie told Lisa that Gary and Carol changed their number, and Carol moved her work schedule. She now left her home around 8 or 8:30 p.m. Lisa told Rosalie that she loved Gary and wanted to have a life with him one day. A woman named Sherry Smithers testified. She was a drug addict, and from 2000 to 2001, she was in the Wayne County Jail with Lisa. Sherry helped Lisa write love letters to Gary, even though he was in prison and she was in jail with impending murder charges. She was still obsessed with him. Lisa Dolph's children and parents testified that Lisa was home from 8:15 to 9 p.m. on the night of the murder. Her father said he heard Ron and Lori Watts talking about hiring a hitman in the summer of 1995. Lisa's mom said in fall of 1995, she heard Lori say that she knew where to find a hitman. Gary Knepp and Dale Smith chose to not take part in the trial. Lisa did not testify in her own defense. The jury found Lisa Dolph guilty of second-degree murder. On April 26, 2005, the court held Lisa Dolph's sentencing hearing. The judge felt the prosecution had presented enough premeditation evidence for a first-degree verdict, but the jury returned guilty verdicts on the lesser charges of second-degree murder, conspiracy, and aiding and abetting in a murder. The defense attorney begged the courtroom to consider Lisa's clean criminal record, her lack of a drug problem, and her productive contributions to society. The prosecution asked for a life sentence because after Carol's murder, Lisa continued to manipulate and threaten people around her. They sentenced Lisa Dolph to 25 to 50 years in prison. She claimed she was innocent and told Carol's family that she has forgiven everyone who unjustly accused her. Carol didn't deserve to die. Whether you believe it or not, I didn't do it. I'm innocent of this crime. God says I have to forgive. I forgive everybody, for they don't know what they have done. Carol's mom said, I don't believe her. Carol told me once that Lisa was a good liar. Gary Knepp was released from prison in 2020. They released Ron Hostetter from prison in 2014. Dale Smith is incarcerated for life at Gus Harrison Correctional Facility in Adrian, Michigan. Lisa Dolph is incarcerated at Woman's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Her earliest release date is November 13th, 2024. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit BeyondContemptPodcast.com for the links to the sources and music used in this episode. Research, writing, editing, audio production, and sound design were performed by me, Renee. I want to thank patron Corey C. Thank you for supporting the show. If you like the show, please leave me a positive review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much, everyone.
I'm not sorry cause that was intentional. I meant every word that I said. Yeah. You get angry with me cause I'm flexible. And of how I like things in the bed. Oh no. My heart's like an ocean. It's deep and it's open. The one thing I promise, I always be honest. Eternal devotion. If we keep things open, if you love all on me, yeah, then you let me be free, yeah. If you love me, then you let me be free. If you love me, yeah. I noticed you're driven by jealousy, but my soul is nothing you own, no. I want us to love unconditionally. It means that I'm not yours alone. No. My heart's like an ocean. It's deep and it's open. The one thing I promise, I always be honest. Eternal devotion. If we keep things open, if you love all of me, yeah, then you let me be free, yeah. If you love me, then you let me be free. If you love me, yeah. How could anyone believe they can own another? Isn't that a bit naive to think you want each other? How could anyone believe they can own another? Isn't that a bit naive to think you want each other? Yeah. My heart's like an ocean. It's deep and it's open. The one thing I promise, I always be honest. Eternal devotion. If we keep things open, if you love all of me, yeah, then you let me be free. If you love me, then you let me be free. If you love me, yeah.